A tangled love story unfolds like a dark detective tale, a crime film, a film noir, with a timeless plot where lust and obsession lead to murder and classic betrayal. This was Jaime's favorite genre, and he played the lead villain. Patricia helped dress him in the costume of a deranged, jealous man, work overalls, gloves, and a stocking mask. Then she, the true star of this film, brilliantly played the victim. Thirsting for authenticity, she cut her own hand and barricaded herself in the bathroom, clutching a real revolver in her bleeding hand to complete the authenticity of her fabricated image. All that was missing was a camera to focus on her wild eyes and feigned horror as she aimed the revolver and fired. On June 25, 2008, at 1:15 a.m., while the residents of Garden Valley, California were peacefully sleeping in their beds, the fire station received a report of a fire blazing along a winding road above a deep gorge. This is a challenging area with many sharp turns, hills, and ravines. Only upon getting closer did the firefighters notice that a burning SUV was at the center of the fire. Their experience told them that the body of the driver might be inside. Unfortunately, they were right. The body, like the entire vehicle, was completely engulfed in flames. Earlier that evening, a report had been made to the emergency services about a missing resident who had gone to buy propane in his Chevrolet Suburban and had not returned. The firefighters could see that the vehicle burning before them was indeed a Suburban. The missing man was 54-year-old Ron Presba. Around 9 p.m., he had left to buy propane for a barbecue and never returned. The remains found at the scene were sent for an autopsy, but officers were able to identify the burned vehicle, and it was indeed Ron's SUV. The news quickly spread throughout Garden Valley. Many people knew Ron personally and were saddened by the news. Initially, everything pointed to the man being the victim of a road accident. On such a rough road, there were many opportunities for a vehicle to go off into the ravine and catch fire. The propane Ron was carrying only added fuel to the blaze. Firefighters found 2 large pools of blood, each more than a meter in diameter, on the road. They speculated that the man had hit a deer, a large animal that could cause such a significant amount of blood. It was hard to imagine a worse place to encounter an animal, a dark, winding road above a deep ravine without any guardrails or barriers. Many people in such situations react by sharply turning the wheel. However, the firefighters could not find the body of the struck animal near the collision site. Moreover, upon closer inspection, the bloodstains looked strange. Between the larger pools of blood were smaller bloodstains, as if something was bleeding, then stopped, then started bleeding again. Nearby, there was a partial footprint and some sort of stain, as if a package or something similar had been lying there. Additionally, there were acceleration marks near the scene, indicating that someone had left the scene in a vehicle, and quickly. Considering these strange findings on the road, the fire investigator suspected that this was not an accident. The suspicions of the fire investigator were confirmed when he found a bag with a reddish liquid near the burned-out vehicle. At first, he mistook it for transmission fluid, but it was strangely covered in flies. Upon closer examination, to his horror, he realized that the bag contained hair, skull fragments, and brain matter. The bag had traces of fire, although the flames hadn't yet reached it. This meant that Ron's vehicle had been set on fire before it went off the ravine. It was likely stopped, set ablaze, and then pushed down the slope. The bag was thrown afterward. This was clearly done intentionally. At the coroner's office, it was confirmed that the victim was Ron Presba. The blood on the road and in the bag also belonged to him. Ron had been murdered, and the fire was used to cover up the crime. Police investigators began their work, and the morning after the body was discovered, they spoke with the victim's wife, Patricia, or Patty. Patty seemed overwhelmed with grief, but was eager to help the police. She said that Ron had no enemies. In fact, someone like him couldn't have had enemies. He was one of the pillars of the Garden Valley community. Everyone saw him as a loving father, devoted husband, very honest, hardworking, reliable, and an all-around wonderful person. Ron would give you the shirt off his back to help someone. He had spent many years building his trucking company before he met Patty. Patty worked for the California Conservation Corps and was part of a program that taught young people who would otherwise get into trouble with the law useful labor skills in firefighting, forest protection, and conservation. It was essentially a work camp for troubled youth. Both Patty and Ron had adult children from previous relationships. The day before, at 4:30 p.m., Patty had gone to visit her daughter and grandchildren who lived an hour away. She called her husband around 9 p.m. and he mentioned that he was going to get propane for the barbecue. However, when she returned at midnight, the house was empty. Ron's daughters told the police that a guest had been staying with the family in recent weeks. This guest was 21-year-old Jaime Ramos. Detectives returned to the family home to speak with Patty again. She confirmed that Jaime Ramos had been living with the family for 3 weeks. He was one of the troubled young people assisted by the California Conservation Corps, and Patty had been his mentor. Jaime Ramos had joined the program a year ago after being charged with assault. Patty and Ron decided to help the young man save money so he could visit his relatives in Texas. Patty described Jaime as a nice guy who had faced many challenges since childhood. His mother had taken her own life when he was just 2 years old. His father was in and out of his life, and after being passed around by various relatives, he eventually went to live with his grandmother, who became like a mother to him. Now Patty had taken on the role of his mentor and friend, and Jaime often sought her advice. She explained that Jaime was finishing his training program at the center, but needed a place to stay for the remaining month. Patty had asked Ron if Jaime could stay in their spare bedroom, and Ron, being a kind-hearted person, agreed. Ron welcomed Jaime into their home, and they developed a strong bond, with Ron becoming like a father figure to Jaime. However, just the day before, Jaime had left. They had lent him some money so he could travel to his relatives in Texas. Jaime's sudden departure seemed suspicious, especially since Patty claimed she didn't know how to contact him. In other words, they had lent the young man money, but she had no way to reach him. Before the detectives could ask Patty further questions, something caught their eye. A few drops of blood by the fireplace caught the detectives' attention. Although there weren't many, they deemed it important and called in the forensic team. Upon their arrival, they processed the room with luminol, causing it to light up with traces of blood that someone had attempted to clean. The detectives realized they had stumbled upon the murder scene. Since Patty had an alibi, Jaime seemed the most likely suspect. However, according to Patty, she and Ron had a good relationship with Jaime. Nevertheless, the detectives reached out to Jaime's family in Texas, who said he was still en route but provided his phone number. Over the phone, Jaime confirmed that Ron had become a true friend and mentor to him in a short period. He expressed his desire to help the police uncover the truth about Ron's death. Strangely, though, he refused to disclose his whereabouts. Since Jaime was using a prepaid phone, the police couldn't trace his location. Instead, they tried to gain his trust, encouraging Jaime to keep calling them and persuade him to reveal what he knew about Ron's death. Meanwhile, Curtis Edwards reached out to them. Curtis was also a member of the program helping young people, just like Jaime. Moreover, Jaime was his roommate. Therefore, he knew something that, in his opinion, no one else suspected. Jaime and Patty were having a romance. Curtis was shocked. All the young people in the organization loved Patty, calling her Mom, but Jaime clearly had feelings for her of a different nature. Despite being 21 years old while she was 47, he was younger than her children. Nonetheless, Jaime asked Curtis not to tell anyone about it. As his friend, Curtis agreed, but now he felt obligated to inform the police. The meeting with the detectives was brief, but its importance for the investigation couldn't be underestimated. Because now the investigators knew that Jaime could have a motive for Ron's murder. It was worth talking to Patty again, because it became clear that she knew more than she was saying. Patty reluctantly admitted that she had been involved with Jaime, but a couple of days before Ron's murder, she ended things with her lover because his behavior was increasingly alarming her. When she brought up the breakup, they were in the car, and Jaime swerved the car as if he wanted to crash into an oncoming vehicle. Fortunately, they avoided the accident, but Patty realized he was willing to do anything just to be with her. At some point, Ron realized that his wife was having an affair, but he reacted as a very understanding person. Ron and Patty agreed to buy Jaime a car so he could go to Texas and stop being part of their lives. Patty and Jaime went to a car dealership to choose a car. Patty told the detectives that they bought the car, packed his things into it, and sent him off to Texas. And this happened just before Ron's murder. Now, however, she was afraid that Jaime would come back to finish what he started, to kill her. However, after reviewing the surveillance camera footage at the dealership, detectives found out that the love affair hadn't ended because Patty and Jaime were holding hands and hugging each other affectionately. But before the investigators could summon the woman for a candid conversation, a new twist emerged in the case. Patty disappeared. A month to the day after Ron's murder, the detectives drove back to the same house. Again, they approached the front door, crossed the threshold once more. The feeling of déjà vu never left them, especially when they saw that the small house had become the scene of another bloody crime. Blood was everywhere, in the kitchen, the living room, the bathroom, even on the doorstep. Chairs were overturned, rugs were displaced as if something had been dragged across the floor. A bloodied kitchen knife lay on the TV stand. The air was thick with the smell of blood, and the bathroom door was broken with bullet holes in it. Everything seemed unreal, like a stage set. Amidst this gruesome scene, the detectives found a note made from cut-out magazine letters. They had never seen such notes before, except in movies. It stated that Patty had been kidnapped. Exactly what Patty had feared Jaime would do. The police began their search for the woman and distributed her description to officers. The next day, July 25, 2008, hundreds of kilometers away from the Presba family home in Salt Lake City, Utah, a patrol officer was checking the registration numbers of cars in a motel parking lot when he noticed a green Hyundai. A quick check revealed that the car was linked to a murder investigation. The officer contacted detectives from California who informed him that two people were associated with this car, Jaime Ramos and Patricia Presba. Approximately 5 minutes later, the door of the motel room opened and a woman came out. She walked straight to the police officer. He aimed his weapon at her, but the woman stated that she was Patricia Presba, and she added, "He's in the room, he's been shot." The policeman didn't know what to think and couldn't imagine what he would see when he entered that door. He and his partner burst open the door and shouted, "Police!" But there was no response. Someone was clearly lying on the bed. The policeman demanded that the person raise their hands and come out, but the person didn't move. The officer thought the person under the blanket was dead. He grabbed the blanket and saw that there was a wounded person there. It was Jaime Ramos. He looked at the policeman and said, raising his hands, "Don't shoot. They've already shot me." Both Patricia and Jaime were taken into custody. While Jaime received medical attention, detectives questioned Patricia. Patty claimed that she also became a victim of Jaime. She recounted that she was sleeping in her bed when suddenly she was grabbed by a man wearing a mask made from a stocking, gloves, and a jumpsuit. She managed to break free, but he lunged at her again. They struggled, wreaking havoc around them. It was only when he dragged her into the kitchen that she realized it was Jaime, although she had never seen him like that before. He confessed to her that he had killed her husband, and she would be next. At one point, Jaime attempted to strike her with a large kitchen knife, slashing her hand as she tried to shield herself. However, she managed to reach the bedroom, grabbed a .44 Magnum revolver, and locked herself in the bathroom. Jaime smashed the door, and that's when she fired 3 times. Dropping the weapon, she ran outside, but even after she shot him 3 times with the Magnum, Jaime caught up with her and seized her. Now he had the gun, and he ordered her to get into his car. They stopped several times along the way, notably to refuel. Detectives puzzled over why she didn't escape from the wounded man while he was refueling the car. Patty replied that she was terrified. What happened next was known to the police. Here, the story could have ended, and Patty would have appeared a heroine if Jaime had died from the gunshot wounds. He was indeed close to death when they found him in the hotel, but he received timely medical attention and he was ready to talk to the police. When at the age of 21, Jaime was admitted to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, where he was given a job, he felt like he had hit the jackpot. He quickly befriended other members of the organization, particularly his roommate Curtis, as well as his supervisor Patty. Initially, he regarded her as a friend and mentor, but soon their relationship became much closer. She didn't immediately confess to Jaime that she was married. Even more so, she didn't tell him how 6 years ago she had to work hard to make Ron fall in love with her when her third husband left her. But she told him that she was living in an unhappy marriage. Jaime's heartstrings were deeply touched by Patty's confessions. The thing was, he himself had been tormented by a male relative for years. It started when he was 6. It started when he was 6 years old, ended at 16, and occurred once or twice a month. Jaime asked Patty to leave her husband, but she always found some excuse why it was impossible. Then she mentioned another option. At first it was like a game, a joke. The woman said, "Do you want me to leave him? What if something unfortunate happens to him?" "Which we arrange?" Jaime asked incredulously. "What else?" Patty initiated conversations about how Ron liked to work around the house and might fall from a ladder onto something sharp or get hit by a car. It seemed like a joke until she showed her lover an envelope with insurance, and then he realized that everything they talked about was serious. She convinced him that after receiving the money, they could start over. Jaime would go to college first and they would live together. She took out insurance on her husband and was supposed to receive $150,000 in case of his death. But if his death occurred as a result of an accident, the wife would receive $300,000. This is called double insurance. Double Insurance is also the name of a true classic of cinema, a film in which a woman seduces a man and persuades him to kill her husband. And then the seductress shoots the naive lover. Jaime hadn't watched that movie, but Patty clearly understood its essence. Or Oscar Wilde was right, and life ultimately does imitate art. But Jaime had no intention of becoming a murderer, and Patty started pressing him. "Don't you believe me? Don't you believe that he's tormenting me, beating me? Don't you want to live with me?" She didn't leave the man infatuated with her any other choice. So he set her a condition. He had to personally see what Ron was really like. The woman agreed. She told her husband that a guy at work insulted her, but Jaime stood up for her, beat him, and therefore he was expelled from the program. Now he had nowhere to live. Ron, being a kind soul, of course, offered the guy to stay with them. He personally went for Jaime, brought him home, and thanked him for standing up for his wife. He said that Jaime could live with them for free and only asked him to help around the house, because what the guy did for him was already enough payment. So Jaime started living with his mistress and her husband. Ron behaved friendly, taught him how to use various tools, and in general treated the guy like a son. But Jaime was most concerned that Ron never raised his voice to his wife, never scolded her, never refused her anything, and it clearly wasn't a show for the public. Doubts began to creep into his mind. Patty described a monster, but Jaime saw a completely different Ron. However, Patty wasn't about to back down. She skillfully manipulated the guy, convincing him that he was saving her from a cruel husband, and set a date for when Jaime would have to attack Ron. Otherwise, he would have to leave and never see her again. The thought of this was unbearable for Jaime. Tuesday, June 24th came, one of the longest days of the year. That evening, Ron sat calmly in his armchair by the fireplace watching TV. Patty had indeed gone to her daughters, but she kept calling her lover, asking if he had finished with her husband yet and why he was taking so long. She insisted that it would be easier to cover up the evidence if it happened outside, so Jaime told Ron that he heard some noise in the pen with his pigs. Ron, of course, believed him and went to check, but Jaime couldn't bring himself to attack the man. When Ron returned home, he sat back in his favorite armchair. Jaime sat on a chair in the kitchen 3 meters away from him and drank a lot of water, as if delaying what he was about to do, trying to calm down. Patty continued to call, asking when everything would be over. Jaime saw the hammer and decided that if one blow to the head rendered Ron unconscious, it would be enough for him. He took one last sip of water, put on gloves, wiped the hammer. The house was so small. Ron was so close. Jaime told himself, "You're doing everything right." He thought about the violence against Patty, remembered how he himself had been abused, and the anger from the flooding memories allowed him to feel a sharp adrenaline rush. He literally jumped up from the chair, ran to Ron, and struck the man 3 times quickly on the head. Ron barely had time to scream, "Why?" But Jaime seemed to snap. He shouted, "How dare you torment my wife? Yes, Patty is my wife now. How dare you hit her?" He struck the man 3 more times, smashing his skull. Then he dropped the hammer. Amazingly, he felt relieved, knowing that he did it for her. But to do everything as she wanted, the killer had to take the body out of the house and create the appearance of an accident. To put Ron in the driver's seat, he had to build a mini-trap from the ladder and plywood. After that, Jaime sat next to the deceased and directed the car towards the cliff, sitting next to the bloodied man whose head he had just smashed. To distract himself from such a reality, he remembered the movie Sin City. There's a scene where a killer drives down a deserted road with a corpse sitting next to him. But when Jaime watched that movie 3 years ago, he couldn't have imagined he would do something similar. On the way, he threw away Ron's chair, the bloodied carpet, and the hammer. Then at the canyon, he used all the props to prepare the final scene of the accident. He doused the car with gasoline, prepared a propane tank, put the man's foot on the gas pedal, flicked his lighter. It was at that moment that the blood flowing from the car spilled onto the road and created a puddle. Jaime set fire to the SUV and rolled the car down. He noticed a packet. Cleaning up at home, he collected pieces of brain in a packet, and now it fell out of the car. Jaime threw it into the ditch, thinking the fire would destroy it. Then he ran to his car, waiting for him at the cliff, and wanted to drive to Texas, but he couldn't. He had to see her. When he entered the house, Patty was washing her husband's blood in the living room. And right where Ron had been killed a few hours earlier, Patty's 3-year-old granddaughter sat watching cartoons on TV. Patty flew into a rage when she saw him. Jaime asked to hug him goodbye. Patty reluctantly complied, and he finally left. On the way, alone with his thoughts, he began to realize what he had done. He felt very ashamed and sick. Jaime was supposed to go to Texas to be with his relatives, but when the police didn't believe in the accident and began investigating the murder, Patty became nervous. She ordered him to go somewhere they wouldn't find him. Her anxiety multiplied when a month later, Jaime told her he was returning to California. The investigators had traced him back to his grandmother, the woman who raised him and whom he obeyed unquestioningly. She told her grandson that he shouldn't behave as if he were guilty of something and returned to California to talk to the police. Jaime agreed, but on his way back, despite his grandmother's and the investigators' advice, he called Patty. Apparently, that's when Patty realized that he was becoming a problem, and it was time to abandon him to save herself. She listened to Jaime and replied that she had a plan that would allow them to spend the rest of their lives together. Wasn't this what he had always dreamed of? She wanted to make it seem as if Jaime had abducted her. He agreed, thinking they would leave together and lie low for a while. Patty ordered her lover to overturn all the furniture in her house and knock down the bathroom door to make the abduction look more realistic. But she didn't warn him that she would be hiding behind it with a magnum. And as soon as he broke the door, she shot. Once, twice, thrice. She hit his hand, leg, and clavicle area. Jaime was in shock, asking, "How could you do this?" The woman calmly approached and pressed the gun to his head, but the gun didn't fire. While Jaime lay on the floor in blood, she went to another room, tried to fix the gun, but changed her mind and left. For some reason, Jaime decided to follow her. Even more unbelievably, Patty said to him, "Okay, let's go," and they left the state together. The next day, Jaime's car was spotted at a motel in Salt Lake City, and the couple was taken into custody. But Patty wasn't done yet. She still had one last hope, to convince Jaime to take the blame. But how could she do that? Before the trial, Patty and Jaime were held in a small jail together, and the plumbing arrangement of the prison allowed Patty to once again get into the heart and soul of her young lover. If you simultaneously flush the water in the female and male toilets, you can talk as if you are in the same room. Most likely, Patty wasn't the first to discover this, but she cleverly took advantage of this peculiarity, persuading Jaime to stick to her version. Allegedly, at first, she also wished for her husband's death, but changed her mind. And then Jaime killed Ron and abducted her, trying to get rid of the only witness. Remarkably, Jaime was willing to go along with this for her sake. However, when the boy's lawyer learned about it, he intervened and shuffled the cards for Patty. He contacted the only person who could break the spell over the woman, Jaime's grandmother. The grandmother and the beloved aunts of the young man ordered him to tell the whole truth. In the interrogation room, the investigators witnessed the power Patty had over Jaime. Despite her confession and everything she had done, Jaime begged for the opportunity to see her. In June 2009, the preliminary hearing began. Unexpectedly, it turned out that Jaime was not the only one whom Patty had tried to persuade to commit murder. Her friend took the witness stand and told that Patty had asked her if she knew anyone who could go for this crime. But even stranger was that she once wanted to kill her ex-husband and then asked the ex-husband if he would kill Ron. On June 29, 2009, Jaime pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and agreed to testify against Patty. But he did not get such an opportunity. Just a couple of days before the start of the trial in February 2010, she also admitted guilt. She was sentenced to imprisonment from 42 years to life for Ron's murder and attempted murder of Jaime. Jaime was sentenced from 25 years to life. Just before starting his sentence, Jaime met with Ron's 2 daughters and told them that he was a wonderful person. He treated him kindly, and Jaime also managed to love him for the short time he knew him. Yet despite what his own eyes had seen, Jaime chose to believe Patty. She chose an impressionable, vulnerable boy who was not loved in childhood, got into his soul, and made him do what she needed.